and welcome back to the Conquest Corner. On this particular episode, we are going to be going through, or continuing to go through, the updates for Wadhrun. Specifically, in this one, we're going to go through the cults. So we previously went through the tribes units. This one is for the cults units, and then we'll be getting to the speakers, or essentially everyone on a dinosaur, coming up after this one. One quick thing I wanted to mention related to the last one. I specifically was trying to avoid, for the moment, upgrades that aren't specific to the piece that we're talking about. I do realize some of the upgrades, like one of them makes for, your Braves, your Veterans, and all that. Oh, it makes them so they can't break and all. That's all really nice. But when I try to look at a unit, I try to look at, well, what does the unit do? How do I like it as is? And then when we talk about, say, the faction overall, then we can talk about, well, okay, what can you slap on this to make it feel better? If a unit doesn't feel good, if you got to scaffold a whole lot of stuff around it, that's still not necessarily good. You're maybe spending a whole lot of points to make something okay. And I want to kind of avoid that as best we can. So, for this then, as we said, we're going to be taking a look at the cult units. We are going to only be looking at war gear, masteries, anything like that, if it's cult specific. Now, some of this stuff does reference cult, so we'll talk a little bit about it. We'll also go over the base rule as well. And keep in mind, if you happen to be wanting to pick anything up for Conquest, we do have a discount code in the show notes below. It's Train Kickers. Saves you 10%, helps us out as well. As we said, it's at time of recording, it's reasonably close to holiday season. And especially for Wadhrun, actually, the Quaddle came out, and I know you're getting one of the other, was it the Cult of Death is coming out. I don't know if it's, I think at time of recording it's not out yet, but it's out a little bit later in the month. So you should be getting that hopefully soon, and anything else that hopefully you're missing will come out in the not too distant future. But we got that, and now, without much further ado, let's take a look. So, new stuff's on the left, old stuff's on the right. I said we're going to go to the cult units, but before we go to that, we have to briefly talk about the main army rule. I do like to talk about the basic army rule in each of these videos. Reason being, one, it's a good reminder for the kind of things we're looking at, especially for this faction. But also, two, in case you watch this one first, then you're not necessarily in the dark. So, as we know, Wadhrun are orcs on dinosaurs, and the big thing is that they chant. Now, the way chants used to work, the basis is still the same. So, when a regiment or a character, and now regiments do, there was a case when some dinosaurs didn't, things like that, but a lot of that has been kind of cleaned up. But when your regiment goes, there can be keywords that say otherwise, but when your regiment goes, or when a character goes, they chant, they put down a marker, depending on which of the cults that they belong to, whether they chose famine, death, war, or some of them can choose conquest. Not as many, but there's a chance of that as well. When there's at least 3 markers in there could be 4 because, or you put a 4th down and then swapped it out, essentially because of character. But when there are 3 and a regiment goes, then they can chant the battle cry. Chanting the battle cry means that you will get some sort of effects. You'll clear out the stack. You might have to switch around some cards and all. There's some mechanics in there. We can discuss the mechanics another time. The big thing that they changed is you used to be able to get to 3 tiers. It was 2 markers or 3 markers, or 3 markers and have a fanatic rule. There was ways for your fanatic units to have it. Your cult units had fanatic. There was also ways for things like matriarchs to give out fanatic, but you could get a variety of bonuses. And the bonuses were rather hefty, I would say, overall. They talked about how this restricted the way they built lists, and it restricts it because I have to take into account, this regiment could chant death, which gives them +1 to the clash and flawless strikes. And if they could be fanatic, untouchable, and deadly blades. Okay, so the regiment, since they could have that, I had to account for the fact that maybe they're stronger than I think, and all of that. What they did now, the first level of famine, death, or war are all the same. Your non-light regiments, the command stands, count for 1 additional for seizing. A nice to have, but nothing to write home about. It's not bad, but you're not going to be ditching markers to do that unless you truly, truly need it in a turn. For Conquest, you would get +2 to your first march. It's the tier 2s you get. You could either get +2 to your charges, which is useful, untouchable, cleave 1, or you could get +2 to your evasion to a maximum of 2. It used to be max of 3 over here. Another important thing to keep in mind with this is some units, like we saw slingers last time, can have an ability that when they chant, they also get an extra bonus. So especially when we're looking at the cults, we're going to see more of that today. I kind of said it last time. The abilities are much more toned down, and the hope is that the units tone them up. But the abilities overall are much less. The other quick thing to mention is that the cults here, it just says that, hey, if your warlord is a particular cult, say war, death, whatever it may be, he can grab or choose 2 of that chosen type, and his regiment is that cult as well. So if you choose war, you can get 2 chosen of war, and he's war in his regiment. That's all that says. All right, so character-wise, we only actually have one to talk about, because a bunch of them are speakers, 2 of them are tribes, but only one of them, there's Sign of Conquest, is, of course, Conquest. That makes sense. All right, let's quickly go through the Sign of Conquest. His points stay the same. His base stats stay the same. Keep in mind, he's not listed as a move anymore. He just has the move of the unit, though most of their stuff went up to 6 anyway, so he's keeping about the same move he had before. He's still cleave 2. He did give a priest level, so he was a 5. Now he's a 6, a little bit better for those spells. He has the same name spell. Some of the spells are a little bit different, but we'll get to those shortly. Warbands, he takes the same exact things for. He is allowed to be Cult of Conquest, even if he's not the Warlord. Normally, the Warlord is the only character who may choose Conquest. Well, I should say, he counts as it even if he's not the Warlord, where a Warlord is allowed to choose as he wants. Previously, he was still Cult of Conquest. But the other thing he got is that he could buy some upgrades. One of them making the regiment he's with Cult of Conquest, so he can't do that anymore. Although in general, they would be anyway, unless they're one of the other Chosens, because the other Chosens are essentially forced to be of that type. So otherwise, you're going to be anyway because your cult relates to whatever your character in that warband is. So not too much of a change there. That's fine. And you can't give Indomitable anymore. His Warlord trait works exactly the same, or his Supremacy ability. His Supremacy ability is simply, hey, once per game in that round, when you're going to pull a card of the stack, just pull any card from the stack you want. So essentially you can stack the deck effectively. You can always be making the right decision. And that entire round, when you chant, you are chanting Conquest. Keep in mind, much like before, Conquest cards can be swapped to any other card before they go off. Also, unlike before, or a little bit of a change from before, to chant Conquest before, you had to chant different types of markers. So Conquest were wild cards, but you had to chant different markers to make it happen. Conquest markers are still wild cards, but to chant Conquest, you actually have to spend Conquest markers. That can mean that's a little bit harder to get the Conquest to go off, except if, say, he is your Warlord and that Supremacy round, then you're getting any Conquest or anything else you want. As we're going to see later, there's ways to help improve this as well. Overall, he's still fine. He's pretty much the same to me in my mind. Maybe he had some weird combination of stuff he could do in the past, but I nothing to write home about. But if you liked him before, he's still solid, and he's a way to get some pretty good spells. And when we take a look at them, we're going to see they're a little bit different, but in most ways better. One of them may be technically worse, but it's at least not as much of a feel-bad experience, and to me, that's important. There's a couple local Wadhrun players. I know a few other Wadhrun players. I played a decent amount against Wadhrun. I don't know if I've seen him, at least in the past, as the Warlord. I don't know if there's any particular reason. I think before it was because you had 2 different characters that shock, let's be honest. Now that they don't work the same way, I could see him maybe as being the Warlord. I think that at least gives some cool options, and means that in that turn when you really need it, probably turn 4, maybe 5, you don't care the order you stack stuff in. When it's my turn, I can make sure I'm always doing the right play. I think that's pretty strong and cool. We were talking about the artifacts. Each one gets an artifact. You can read what they do. All of them are cheaper. They, to one extent or another, work similar or vaguely different, or potentially rather. So like Death's Gaze is pretty similar. It gives the character impact 3. It used to be the regiment gets impact 3. It used to be impact 2, and you can get some glorious charge. So if you look at all of them, they're a bit different, but nothing too crazy to write home about. I think they are good. I'll just say, for the fact that they're cheaper, you're going to take them, but our goal is not to necessarily go through all these artifacts right for the moment. I'll probably discuss them when we do more of a general army overview. But I want to get through units before we talk about the ways in which you'll buff the different pieces. I said, the Bloodhorn used to give reroll charge, used to give unstoppable. Hey, now to that particular one, when you're going to chant it tier 2, hey, you get more tramples. Cool. You have the various armors. There's nothing particular that is locked to him, so we're not going to be taking a look at that. Now, we will talk, since we are talking cult-based things, we will end up talking about the mastery. We'll talk about the teachings of Conquest. So, for Vision, as it says, it's 30 points. Your Warlord has to be Conquest. And they gain forward force. Forward force, in case you don't remember, gives flank. So your character stands can come in when they want. As long as it's a legal turn, of course. For 30 points. That's something. I don't know if I care so much about timing unless I'm taking multiple tons of characters. And I don't see this as... the most I've usually ever seen is like 3. The typical I see is often like a 2. So, not as concerned related to that. Now, for the other ones, they do relate to whatever your Warlord follows. Notice before what it used to do, I should say it briefly, is it upped your reinforcement roll. So, all the regiments in their particular warband, that character's warband, got a +1 to their adjustment. Now, those particular ones get to come in if they have a character in them when you want. Depending on what you put in the warband, better or worse. There is a variety of others. They do relate to the other pieces. Like if we just look at the main required ones, and now notice they are deviated out a lot more than they used to. There are some differences. We look at teaching a famine. So if you are Warlord's Cult of Famine, you gain regiments in the Warlord's Warband gain the Cult of Famine battlefield roll. Okay. And your infantry regiments gain Vanguard. So your infantry regiments will get much further up. For 30 points, it's pretty good, depending on what exactly you throw in there. I like that. Blood. Again, you have to be Cult of Death for this one, 30 points. For every 2 enemy stands, a non-monster Cult of Death regiment destroys as part of a charge or class action, gets +1 to its evade to a maximum of 3. Very good as long as you bring the right things and you can get it to work. When you're talking about, say, your Apex Predators and stuff like... non-monster, my apologies. Not the Apex, your other things. That is actually overall good. Yeah, just Cult of Death Regiment. So it doesn't have to be from that particular warband or anything like that. Better evasion does help because in some of these units you're looking at very, very bad saves or almost no saves, or maybe their only save is a base 2 evade. Now you can get up to base 3 evade. So if you happen to be taking a variety of death units, I do think that's actually very good. I do really like that one. Authority, 40 points. You have to be calling Fallen Cult of War. Your Blooded, Braves, and Veterans cannot be broken. This is the thing I mentioned at the top. I don't think that saves the Blooded, the Braves, and the Veterans from what I thought of them, if you watch the other video. I was very ho-hum on them. And for 40 points, I only want to spend 40 points on there if I'm bringing in a bunch of them. And I don't think bringing in a bunch of them is a winning strategy, personally. There is some other pieces. I guess maybe we'll talk about Cure as well under Death. Notice these are a bit different than that before, so it's not really that same sort of attachment. Hey, your regiment you're touching gets gained Deadly Blades. That's really good. Deadly Blades is a great rule. For 15 points, I can absolutely see that, because you have some blender type units, or units that are just getting a bunch of swings, you want a bunch of swings because that's what's going to make Deadly Blades go. Nothing else is locked to a cult, so we're going to skip the other ones for now. And also to make this a little bit shorter, hopefully. For the masteries, not really worried. Drum Beast Rider, Scion character only. So, since he's listed, we'll take a look at him. For 10 points, hey, you can go on a Drum Beast. You can buy it multiple times. Like I said, you get the Rider special rule. You got to choose a Drum Beast. And if that's the case, your spells get plus 4 inches. Unless it's a self-spell, of course. If you only cast a spell on yourself, it doesn't matter. Speaking of spells, let's get to the spells. Spells are actually fairly different. Cacophony is no longer scaling, and they removed, at least in their case, spells that said your opponent doesn't really get to do blank. There is one that still does a little bit of that, but that one was like, hey, you don't get your draw events. You don't get the things that make you work. There's one later that said like, hey, now I discard a chant card, your spell doesn't work. What they do now, say for Cacophony, still 12 inches, need a 4, but hey, you take 1 hit per success. You're on 6 dice, so you're looking at about 4 or so hits. That's fine, I guess. That's not the one you're necessarily going with. Crescendo does exactly the same. You get to put a chant marker of Conquest down and then, reconfigure your top 3 command cards. Dissonance used to be self on a 4. Now it's 12 inches on a 3. It used to be the one that, hey, you can discard chant markers to turn their ability to do spells of you within 12 inches of you off. What it does now, until the end of the round, when a friendly target regiment chants the battle cry, the current engaged enemy regiments don't get inspired. So I am shutting something down from you, but I'm not stopping what might be a fundamental rule that makes your army work, and instead I'm just making you have to swing a little bit more to get the same results. Discordance is now a 4 scaling instead of a 3. It was enemies can't seize an objective zone, and hey, still can't seize that objective zone. Resonance stayed the same in those particular ways, and is there actually any difference to it at all? You look at someone near a target objective zone and give them to K2. Nope, exactly the same. So some of the spells didn't change, but they did remove at least the one that said you don't get to effectively kind of play the game. All right, let's take a look for our units. I will say specifically, I chose to do the speakers last because they have a lot of units, and I just didn't want to do all those units yet. I will get to them, of course. All right, Chosen a Conquest. They went down by 20 points, and they went down by 20 points per stand. They used to be 230 for a pack of 3 and 80 points each. Very, very expensive, and you had to buy the Standard Bearers. Standard Bearers are free now. Standard Bearers are pretty much free across every faction, all armies, all pieces that had standards. But you get all that stuff for free. Hey, they're also faster. So you're saving 20 points base. You're saving 20 points a stand. You're saving an extra 20 points because the last thing you want is to roll 2 on your charge and miss that 3-inch charge. So you're getting the free Standard Bearer. And now you're moving a little bit faster. You have 1 less wound. Used to be 7 wounds, which is honestly kind of ridiculous. But you're down to 6. You still have that evade of 1, and we saw there's some ways to potentially up those. You are still cleave 1. Your impact 2. Fanatic isn't a thing. You don't have Fanatic because Fanatic essentially before is what lets you get to that tier 3. Instead, you're going to have a cult type rule that says, hey, maybe you get this thing, or hey, when it goes off, maybe you get a cool thing. They were always Call to Conquest. Hey, Call to Conquest. The regiment must always be Call to Conquest and can only chant from the cult they follow. In addition, when they chant the battle cry, so this is the alteration of what Fanatic essentially used to be, it may form a third action during its activation round, following all normal restrictions. So when they chant, they get 1 extra action. Especially, now notice, they could only chant from the cult they follow, so they can actually only chant Conquest. Keep in mind what Conquest does. You either get +2 to your first move, or +2 to your evade. These guys are only base Veda 1. They could go up to a Veda 3. And the other thing they can do is get more on the move, and when they chant goes off, they get an extra action, which means they can get now an 8-inch move, and then they could charge an attack. As someone who plays Sorcerer Kings, being able to get a unit to have an extra action where you can spend it just to move to get within range, that means these guys are a 14 plus a d6 charge. Charges before you either wouldn't attempt or couldn't attempt, now we're guaranteed and might not even have to bother rolling for it. So the Chosen of Conquest got better. What I will say, okay, what we see of them got better. Obviously, before, you could have given them various other buffs and bonuses. However, with this, I think it's a good trade-off. They're cheaper. Lost Wound is fine, a little bit faster, and they gain quite a bit by what the rule is. And like I said, if you're doing this, you like the buffs that they're giving them, and the what they get third action is huge. So I will say overall, absolutely like them. I think they did a lot of good for these guys. Let's take a look at the Chosen of Death. So 220, they dropped them by 10 points, kept them the same per stand. That didn't change. Notice you get a free standard bearer though, so you are saving that 20 points in that same sort of way. You are keeping the same move. You did lose 2 attacks. You used to be 8. Otherwise, you were and you lost an evade. Used to be evade 3. You're now only evade 2. So for 10 points less, you are definitely a decent bit weaker in terms of that. They used to be cleave 1 with Fanatic. Fanatic's not a thing now. They now have loose formation, so you're taking half shots. Flurry, so you only are 2 less attacks, but you're more consistent now. So that's your ceiling is not as high, but your floor is much higher. And they have flawless strikes. So before you had cleave 1, but now you have flawless strikes to kind of supplement that a bit. And you are base going to get more hits because you are getting to reroll that. Much more likely you actually get these hits through. So you're getting more hits, but they're getting better armor against it. Although if the enemy has hearted, that didn't matter anyway. So I think that's fine. I think overall it's a reasonable equal change. The difference in evade hurts a little bit. When we look at their special thing, the Cult of Death. Okay, they're Cult of Death, and they can only chant Cult of Death. When they chant a battle cry, +1 to the evasion till the end of the round. So they have to chant to get the evasion that they used to have. Keep in mind, these are of death. So their command stand, for all the other ones, the command stand will be 1 extra for scoring, and they gain Untouchable. Untouchable means you're going to reroll your defenses of 6. On the turn it goes off, that means you're going to pass half the time, and 1/3 of the fails you get to reroll. You'll pass half of those. That's not the same exact thing as having a 4, but it's about. Actually, because then a 1 in 3, and then a 50% on that. No, that's pretty much exactly like a Veda 4, for all intents and purposes, assuming average dice. They're about a side grade. The reason I call them, honestly, they're probably a bit of a downgrade. They're probably a downgrade. Their base rules in terms of the number of hits they're going to get and the damage they're going to deal is fairly equal. They had more attacks with cleave, but now they have less with flurry and flawless strikes. So that's probably about equal. Loose formation will help them not to get shot down, but their base evade is worse. Keep in mind, in a round, you're probably going to get off multiple chants, but not every regiment gets it. Not every single regiment is going to have the cards to chant. Now, when you're talking about the cult units, these are some of the cases where maybe you do chant with 2 markers just because you want to get to go off. Remember, you have to get to 3 markers, but okay, your timing maybe, I just really want them to have that extra plus, so I can time them a little bit earlier when this chant would only be 2 death markers instead of all 3, all those sort of thoughts. But I would say overall, I don't know, they're not inspiring me. Cult of Conquest, I kind of got very excited about. These ladies, I'm a bit less inspired about. I don't think it's bad, but I'm kind of meh on what their changes did to them. They The Cult of Conquest feels, or Chosen of Conquest, I should say, feels like they can do their job without a chant, but the chant really makes them sing. They feel like they're lacking a bit, and the chant gets them back to where you want them to be. I don't want chanting to feel like I need it to make a unit okay. We'll talk about Famine real quick. It is a preview. Notice they didn't put the points, but much like all the others, you're going to get your standard bear where you used to have to pay for it. We're looking at less attacks base, so their thoughts are that 8 attacks is too much. But they did give them an extra wound and kept the resolve sitting on that 4. They gave them cleave. They used to not be, and they're putting them to medium. I think that's an absolutely great change now, so unit scores. Hard to know exactly what's going to happen until we see some of those points. Obviously, they have to be Famine, and they get Terrifying 1. Famine, the second part gives you +2 to charge, so the 8 on the charge helps you out with the charge. Fine, we have to see the points. If they are close to the others at around 200 or so, going to medium now being scoring, having cleave and on the correct turns when you need it, getting extra on charge, pretty good. So you have less attacks, but now cleave, so a pretty fair trade-off. They're fine. I think they didn't, nothing that they have feels worse, and it doesn't feel like, oh, if they don't get their chant, they're bad. They feel about the same. For the other bit, where are we at? I know they're Chosen of War. I don't know why they're all the way down here. I don't know who made this ordering, but it wasn't me. Chosen of War. Used to be 210, now they're at 200, so they're a little bit cheaper, still the same per extra stands. We are looking at the same exact stats, so that didn't change. They're still Cleave 1. They're still Line Breaker. They still have shields. They are unstoppable with their impact of 2. All they lost was Fanatic, but everyone lost that. That's not a rule anymore. That's all they had before. So you save 10 points, and the extra that you get now is obviously they have to chant War, and they get +1 Cleave. So War gives them Cleave 1. They get +1 Cleave, and they are naturally... Yeah. The second tier of War doesn't help them. The second tier of War doesn't give you +1 Cleave. It gives you Cleave 1. They already have Cleave 1. Only pluses stack. So these guys do get the Cleave 2, but they don't care about getting to that higher tier. That's really weird. A Cleave to a Line Breaker is very good. So on the turns they do it, Cleave to a Line Breaker is great. You probably don't need the extra. However, it being Cleave 1, not +1 Cleave for War, really kind of hurts a unit that already has Cleave. We haven't seen tons of Cleave, but that does mean choosing having War go off. You really want to be careful what units get it, because if they already have Cleave, it won't help them at all. So it feels like they want the chant, but they don't care about the bonuses that the chant really gives. Your command sound cannon is 1 extra is nice, but the other bonus is useless to you. So they're a little bit cheaper. They are better. However, they benefit less overall from the chants. The previous chants they could do or get a little bit more utility, I would say less utility in this one. Because before they always followed Cult of War, but now they have to chant War. That wasn't exactly a requirement before, so. Last one we have to talk about is the Drum Beast, because the Drum Beast is cult-based. So Conquest, I really like those guys. They're fine. Not amazing. Sorry, Drum Beast, there it is. They flipped the order. Still sitting at 310. His stats, I believe, are still identical. Still has the same basic stats. His rules, he's still brutal. So he is still Cleave 1. He's still got his 6 impacts. He still has Line Breaker. He's fearless, obviously. He's Trample 8. He's Oblivious. He was Oblivious before. And he is Inspired. So, hey, he's got Inspired. That's pretty good, especially when they're on a class or 2. He has some extra bits. Before, he had special rules essentially attached. 1, he was size 4. He's still size 4. He had March of Giants always count as Inspired. Now he just has it base. His March of Giants now is that his march characteristic and march distance cannot be negatively affected. So he's only moved 6, but he's always moved 6. You can't lower it or do anything to it. That's very useful. For his drum beat, it says when a friendly regiment, including the drum beats, within 10 inches puts a chance marker to sequence, it may immediately choose and to add an additional chant marker, so you can put more chants down. Your goal is to chant in this army. Putting more of them is good. What Drumbeat used to do as a drawl event was that you added a chant marker that matches a cult that's already down. So now instead, 10-inch zone, people can chant twice. That means you're going to get your chants off a lot more often. That's already adding a lot of utility to this guy. So absolutely love that change. That was his, Sound of the Drums. That was his drum beat. He also used to have Sound of the Drums, meaning that you did not have to chant the battle cry. And his other special rule he used to have is that he was called to Conquest, and he chants Conquest. So that's what he did before. For what he does now, in addition, he has the access to the following chant: Primal Cacophony. You may chant this battle cry by discarding 3 chant markers of any cult in combination from the sequence. Enemy regiments within 10 of him must use their lowest resolve. Depending on the opponent you're going against, that's actually super, super strong. So this is a different chant he can do instead of the base chant. So he lost a few of his other pieces. He essentially does chants now. He does the chant of whatever his warlord is. So that's a little bit different than what he did before. But he did lose that you could delay your chant going off. Now your chant must go off, but you're going to get chants more often because this guy lets you add 2 markers when other people go, not just himself. It does have to be a regiment, can't be the character, but that does mean if you do a character then regiment activation, you can get a chant each time for any of your regiments that have a character in them. Because the character puts down a marker, the regiment puts down 2 markers, then they chant the battle cry. So overall, I love the giant monsters. I think they're absolutely great. And I know, at least for the moment, depending on when you watch this, I know they were running a bit of a sale on them. I don't know if they're still on sale, but if you wanted them, hopefully you pick them up. I just like them. Even if they're not great, I don't care if they're not great. I like him. At 300 some points, I think he's going to give you quite a bit of utility. I think if you're relying on chance, you're going to get them more. I think chants are not nearly as impactful, but we did talk today about units that care about chants because they get extra bonuses on top of what the chant does. That's where I think this shines. So if you're taking some of those chosen units, this guy really does a lot of good. Or if you're taking slingers, because slingers want chants going off, because slingers get a lot better when the chants are going off. So, and his Primal Cacophony, depending on the opponent you're going against, that could be huge. As you're getting people in, and now they're on their lowest resolve, on some of these, taking a look at some Spires units, you might be on like 1s, maybe even 2s. There's a lot of units where you're on that, but the character's buffing them, and you're a big enough unit. No, you're using the lowest resolve characteristic in that regiment, so even the buffs aren't going to help you nearly as much as they used to, because you're on a lower number to start with. So, I like the guy, but it's a giant dinosaur. I'm going to be happy with giant dinosaurs no matter what. All right, so overall thoughts on the Colts units. They're a super mixed bag. I like the dinosaur. I like the Chosen at Conquest. I think death is up in the air. I think war is a side grade. If you liked them before, you're still going to like them. If you really didn't like them before, I don't think they changed them in a way that's really going to make you happy. I think you're going to be a little upset with the way that they have the war chant. The fact that it's not a cleave +1, that it's a flat cleave. And famine is a wait to see, because we don't know what it's going to look at. As for the Scion of Conquest, I think his Warlord or his Supremacy ability, I think you could actually start seeing it. I think as someone who has at times used characters where it's, okay, hey, here's the turn, I need this thing to happen. or ability, I need this to happen now, being able to decide the order things go in is really useful, and getting whatever chance you want at the time is very useful, because if all your markers are Conquest, you could swap them on the fly. Something like that with a Drum Beast is going to mean that you're getting whatever you want very, very often. So Zion of Conquest I like overall. His not letting that unit be Conquest, I guess in reality, in the past that mattered. It doesn't really matter so much now, because when you take a look at them, even then it said they always followed the cult, and then you could do this, so it's fine. Him losing that ability, I think, is absolutely fine. But that's these guys. Let me know what you do think about this. Oh, and the upgrades were fine. The upgrades are fun. They're not always amazing, but a lot of the upgrades were fun, and they're cheap enough, and the points went down enough where I think you could easily throw that in and get some cool effects. All right, so that ends it for us for the cults units. We will be back with the speakers units. That will end all of the updates. We can talk about the armies in general as well when we kind of get through all of that, especially for these ones that were entirely redone. I'll plug right here at the end, as always. Of course, if you are looking to pick anything with Conquest, Terrain Kickers, we have a discount code in the show notes below. Link you can click on. You can save yourself some money. Help us out as well. Really nice to do. For other things, hopefully very soon, once this is done, we'll also be doing a listing of ease of getting into the faction. I'm going to be working with Steve on that one. I am, at time of recording tomorrow, recording some stuff for Trench Crusade with Dan tomorrow. We're going to talk about just the game in general as we wait for STLs and for terrain to get built up, which are things that we're working on the terrain. But the STLs we're waiting on for that release. As soon as they are, I'm going to print off probably every faction and go from there. But you'll be seeing that probably about a day after you see this, as well as some other bits and pieces as well. All right, well, on behalf of everyone here at the show, has a good hobby. It's a great gaming.